Hello there everyone, this is Brother Birch. In this video, we're going to go through the lesson 6 team assignment. So with this assignment, we're going to kind of break this up into two parts. Error handling and validation are two very different things. Validation is we check client-side data to make sure that it's what we're expecting. And error handling is if any type of error occurs, we want to handle it gracefully. Okay, so with validation issues, I might send something back to the client that says, oh, you need, 8 characters in your password, right? Whereas an error handling situation is the user tries to sign in with their username and password or create a user with the username and password, and there's like a network issue or something just like failed to complete the request, right? Whereas the other one, it's just you just check the data, but that's about it, right? Now with Mongoose, with MongoDB, we can use Mongoose to kind of force a certain type of data into our database. So with MongoDB by itself, I can put pretty much anything in there that I want to in any format. But with Mongoose, I need a structure, right? And so that's one example of where these two would kind of meet a little bit, because Mongoose would provide that structure. And if I tried to post something or create a resource that didn't fit in that structure, then an error would come back from MongoDB, right? So it's almost like validation, but in that case, it'd be an error coming back from my database. Anyways, so what we're going to do, this video will be split up into two pieces. We're going to go ahead and start off with error handling. Both of these are extremely important, and you really do need both of them. And so error handling, we'll go ahead and handle our errors, make sure we have a spot for everything to get caught if an error is going to be triggered. And then validation will kind of be like our cleanup and everything. We'll make sure that a user can't process 1,000 requests a second if they write a loop and things like that. So this activity is starting from the lesson 4 proof assignment solution. Okay, so that's just from that other branch. I went ahead and put it in here in case there are ever going to be changes. But so that's where this code is coming from. And if we start off, let me just open up VS Code real fast. So I cloned it right here, and you can see everything that I've changed, which is really nice. This doesn't show up as changed, but this .env file I created, and it has my MongoDB URI. Okay, everything else in here will show up as things that I've changed. Okay, I made a simple change to the swagger.json. If I click right here, I changed this to localhost. Okay, because it was on my published app. I changed it to HTTP because I'm not using HTTPS locally. That's just on Heroku. And then it just auto formatted a couple of things when I saved it, but it didn't really change anything else. Okay, so that's all I changed in there, just so that I could see my contracts here locally. Okay, if I go to my server.js file, I just changed this port to 8083 just because I have other stuff running right now. I'm working on some other projects. But lines 15 through 18 are definitely new, okay? There are a lot of ways that we can handle errors, and there are a lot of different errors and exceptions there are lots of different exceptions that we can use to handle errors in our code. Some of these articles right here have a lot of them that are seen, and you can see how you can even like add middleware to say, yep, I'm going to use all these exceptions right here throughout my entire application. And there's a lot that you can do to set up that type of stuff. I want to show you guys kind of like the bare minimum of what you should do. And then depending on your application, you might think about doing some more. So if I was making a game, I might want to check for more errors if things aren't in sync or if things aren't updating properly, or if multiple users are trying to do things that they're not supposed to be doing. Or if I was making an application where a user could basically save files or images inside my database, I want to make sure that things get parsed correctly, and maybe I'd throw exceptions if files could be read or something like that, right? But with this application, this is just my contacts project from our first chunk of the semester. I'm going to leave this nice and simple so you guys can see an idea of how to implement these things, and then as you need to take it to further lengths, you can, and you just keep on adding on to it. If you add enough, then yeah, go ahead and throw it into another file, into some middleware, whatever you want to do. Okay, but this code right here, process.on uncaught exception, Right now I just have it logged into the console. You can actually have this write to a file if you want to. So when I grabbed this example, I grabbed it just directly from Node.js's documentation on how to handle exceptions. And this is really just a catch-all thing, right? I had an error in my code at one point, and instead of my program crashing, it didn't crash, it kept on running, but there was this log in the console of what error was thrown. And that would be really effective if this was on Heroku and someone was like, oh yeah, like it just stopped working. I tried to sign in and it just stopped working. Okay, well, that's really hard to debug. And if you had something like this, logging to a file, then you would see exactly what went wrong, okay? And so having this right here, process.on uncaught exception, this is just like a catch-all. If any errors are thrown, it'll go ahead and print up the error, in this case, in your console, okay? And then everything else in this file is the same. The last one that I changed is the contacts.js controller. And you'll notice down at the bottom, I actually didn't make any changes, okay? The main idea here is that we have an if-else concept right after every single request that we make to a database. So we want to check to see if something actually worked or if it didn't. In this case, like right here, we say, hey, if the deleted count is greater than 0, awesome, we'll go ahead and say that was successful. If it wasn't, that means that it failed for some reason. So we can just pass on a generic 500 for internal server error, and then we can actually just display that error, right? If there was an error, great, we can display that. Otherwise, we can just display this string, okay? Now, with this, do be careful with this because sometimes this isn't the best thing to have in production. Sometimes this would be better saved to a log file that you can access, but maybe you don't want to show everyone on your website that, oh, you had a password that was incorrect, but the email was correct when you tried to sign in or something, you know? And you might not always want to show these errors directly. And so you can always just show just like a generic error. And then if you want to log this error to some type of a file, you always can, okay? But anyways, this has that logic where if we have something that was modified successfully, great. Otherwise, we'll display that error, right? Same with here. And so I didn't actually do anything with these functions because they already have a very simple error check in place, but it's enough that if something fails, the user doesn't think that the contact was updated. And then they go to refresh the page and they're like, wait a second, that wasn't updated. Or a contact was deleted, right? I want them to know if something failed, all right? And how much we should tell them is just totally depends on the application, okay? Go up here, same thing here, we already had this. Hey, if we have the response.acknowledge field, then we know that it worked out. Otherwise, we'll send a 500 again, okay? Now up here, I have two different ones. These are actually pretty much the exact same thing, just another way that we could implement this. And so I did change my code just a little bit. So if I make that bigger, let me close this. We did have MongoDB getDB collection.find and then result.toArray.then lists. This is very presumptuous of us to say, oh yeah, this will always work every single time, no question. But if this ever came back as like a failed response or like a string saying there was an error or something, this toArray function would completely break our entire program, all right? And so over here, look at a potential solution. There are lots of different ways that we can handle this. Right here, we just say .find, and then instead of assigning that to result, and then saying result.toArray, I looked on MongoDB's documentation, and I can just say find.toArray, and if that fails, they can catch it and send me an error. Okay, and so if that error is present, I'll just say, hey, let's go ahead and just send a 400. And a 400 is just like a generic user error, okay? And so I could send that as a 400 or a 500. Some people even think 404. But anyways, I chose for a 400, and then I'll go ahead and just send that error, okay? And then if there isn't an error, then this won't get run, and then we'll go ahead and just send this variable back with a 200, okay? And then we did pretty much that same thing here. We did find. This time we have a bit of a query in there with the find. We try to convert it to an array. If it fails, we'll go ahead and return 400 with the error. And if it doesn't, then we'll go ahead and display that. So, okay, well, you guys, that is it for this section of the video for our error handling. I'm just going to go ahead and make a commit And let me actually just make sure that I'm on the right branch here. Okay, and I'm going to say git add all those and git commit -m adding, whoops, adding error handling. Okay, and so that is committed. And so now the next time when I pick up this video, any changes that you see will just be for the data validation. All right, everyone, we are back. I just added some code for validation purposes. And so the goal of validation, remember, is to just make sure our data is valid, right? We want to make sure before I make any request to a database that our data looks good. Back in the day, there were a lot of issues with, people, even today, people submitting requests, and in their input, they'll write a SQL query to drop tables or retrieve data that they're not supposed to. And if we would just do some simple data validation on some inputs, that would never happen, right? Now, we are just on the back end. And so really what we need to do is every time we process any request, we need to make sure that no data is getting to the database that shouldn't be. And so let me just go through these files that I changed. Let me start with the routes. Okay, so this is what was there, and this is what is there now. I made a middleware, which I just called validate, and I actually pulled this from here. Okay, I can't remember what I Googled. Node.js how to validate data, and that was the first one that came up. It was awesome. So if you look at this, it has a use validate.js, which is a package that I installed, which is why my package and package lock JSON files were changed. But you create the middleware to say, hey, what's required? What are the rules? And you can do all sorts of stuff, right? I'm barely even scratching the surface here, but there's a lot here that you can do, even with like regular expressions and things. But anyways, just so you know where I was getting that. Now, if we look here, so I'll go to my middleware, validate.js, and this whole thing's new. And I got this almost 100% from that website that I just showed you. I just changed this object to what I needed for my database, right? So my contacts, I said, hey, they have to have a first name, last name that are strings. They have to have an email that validates as an email. So like test, they need an @ and then some text and some more text after a period, right? That would validate as a valid email. They have to have a favorite color, which is just a string, and then birthday is optional, okay? But that's a string too, okay? And so there are these validation rules. It gets validated based on these rules, and then if everything goes okay, then we'll just continue to the next function. Now, this is a middleware function, which means it takes a few parameters, right? It takes in the data that we need to validate, the rule that we're validating it against, any specific error messages that I want to display, and then a callback function. Okay, this is an anonymous inline function, which just means it doesn't have a name, but this is a function. These are the parameters and the values that we passed into the function, so error and status. And if it failed, then we'll go ahead and send a 412 saying that validation failed. And if it didn't, then we'll just say next. Now, where this next goes, it was passed in right here, and where it goes is on. So we have this right here, and if that says next, then we just go to the next one right here. Okay, I could have a dozen different functions in here, all sorts of middleware before I finally finish what I want to do. Right? There's no limit to how many functions that I can call and just continue this. It's one of the beautiful things of Node. And so right here, when I say validation.saveContact, I only needed one function in here because right now in this project, I'm only dealing with one data entity. We just have contacts. And so anytime I put or post a contact, I want to validate that request body to make sure that it is perfectly valid. Even if the data is not the best, I could have like typos in my names or something, I guess, but it will require that these are strings, that this is an email, and that these 4 fields are contained in that. Okay, and so it'll go to validation.saveContact, and then if you look at my controller here, if I go up to like my let's see here, where is it? oh, right here, create contact. I don't have any validation here, right? Because all of this, I already checked. I already checked to make sure that all of that was valid. And so I'm good. And I'm ready to pass on the rec.body object to this insert one function. Okay, there it is. Okay, and so anyways, so yeah, those are there. Okay, and if you look at these routes again, these are for the post and the put, where I'm actually going to save a bunch of data, where I'm going to save a JSON body to my database, where I have this middleware in place. Now, the only other places that I really need validation are when I'm going to try to get data from my database, right? Anytime, it's like with these IDs, I don't want someone trying to hack something, right? If they're like passing in funky stuff for the ID, I want to validate that that's a valid ID. This get all, I was like, you know what? If I have this route, if I'm open to having this route in my application anyways, then yeah, let's go ahead and just have it. But any type of parameters that I have where these are like types in data and they can put in an ID, that's what I want to validate. If they can put in a body, that's what I want to validate. Okay, and so if we look back at my controller here, really simple way to validate this. I just Googled best way to validate if it's a valid MongoDB ID. And this object ID, which I was already importing from MongoDB so that I could create new object IDs so that I could hit find, okay? It has an isValid function. And so I could say, hey, is this a valid ID? If it's not, then I'll just say, hey, you must use a valid contact ID to find a contact. And then this is to get single. And then I do the exact same thing down here for update. Must use a valid contact ID to update a contact and to delete. Must use it to delete a contact. Okay? And so those are all in place. And if this equates to true, then this is what will get returned. And none of the rest of this function will do anything. Okay, it'll leave that function. Okay, so now that you guys have seen the code that's there, actually I think I missed one. Validate middleware, helpers. Oh, yeah, and this was just like from their documentation that was on that website that I just showed you. But both these were needed. So this one's requiring validator.js, and then this validate.js middleware uses that other file. And I can put as many functions in here as I want to that I can use throughout my application, really based on data, right? So I only have one because I only have one data entity that I'm really working with. I'm never going to let a user post a theme, even though I have themes in my application, okay? So anyways, looking at what this does, if I go, let's see here. Oh, where did it? Oh, it's right there. I moved it over. Okay. If I look here, I just hit refresh. If I say like get ID, and I'm trying to like hack the system, like hack Mongo, and I just have something invalid right there. It says must use valid contact ID to find a contact. If I type in just like some random number, it says the same thing. If I have a valid pattern here, this isn't an actual ID in my database, then it totally works. It gets requested, okay? And so it said it's a 200. It just didn't return any data. It would just return, just an empty array in this case. But if I change that even to be like one character more, then it will say, hey, no, must use a valid contact. I think theirs are like 16 or 24 characters long, and a few other patterns in there. You could use a regular expression, but where MongoDB has that in place anyways, it's awesome. Okay, let's try to post a new contact. If I just try to post this example, I'm going to have to update my Swagger docs. Hit try it out and execute. It says, hey, validation failed. Okay, that's coming from that function. And then the message, the email format is invalid. And so I'd be like, oh, wow, yeah, look at that. That is invalid. So I could say, let's see if that works. Yeah, that worked. Okay, so it's just looking for that @string, period string, and then it'll work out great. But if I tried to like disclude any one of these, like favorite colors required, and if I tried to run that, let's see the error that comes up. Favorite color field was required. So really nice because I didn't have to, that's coming from validate.js that that's doing that. And cool, sending back a 412 precondition failed. So anyways, so that's how I completed this activity. Now again, looking at this, because there are so many different things that you could do with this, I'm actually kind of excited to see what you guys end up coming up with for your solutions. But I hope that this has been helpful for me or for you guys. As a basic rule of thumb, anytime we get any data from the user, we want to validate it. We want to make sure that it's valid and that it's the type of data that we're expecting. Anytime we do any type of interaction with any outside source from our application, including a database or other APIs, we want to ensure that we have code in place where we can catch exceptions when they occur. If anything fails, we want to handle that gracefully instead of just not showing the user they didn't update a contact, for example. Okay. So anyways, I hope that this was helpful. I'll go ahead and make this last commit and push this code up, and I'll share that link with you guys. So if you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks.